Hello and welcome back. In this video we're going to quickly go through the rest of the directory in the root folder, and we haven't touched on sbin, snap, serve, swapfile, sys, temp, usr, and var. Now sbin, we've talked about sbin a little bit previously when we were talking about the bin folder, and as you can see, bin is linked to the usr bin, and we're still coming to USR anyway, but you know that bin is where binaries are kept, and we went into examples of binaries. Remember the ls, pwd, these programs are actually binaries. Now sbin, on the other hand, the s there is for system. So any binaries that are very specific to systems that's been used by the kernel or any other part of the operating system, as long as it's related to the system, you will typically find them in the sbin folder. Snap. Now there's a separate video on package management, and snap is related to package, and by package I mean when it comes to installing softwares in Linux, we use package managers like apt. I talked about apt the other time. You remember when we installed tree, we used apt get install. That was the command we used then. Now apt or apt, and sometimes it can be used like this, apt install. So whether you're using apt or apt get, it's the same thing, and these are package managers. Now snap is more recent to Linux operating systems. It has an approach to installing softwares that is different from how apt installs softwares, and we'll go deep into that in future videos. But the snap folder is where you would find packages related to snap. If you have done any installation with snap, for example, if I were to install the tree software, if I were to install it with snap like that, the files related to that installation, you would find them in the snap folder. Now srv, sometimes some people refer srv to service, some people refer it to server, but whichever way you look at it, srv is where certain service files are kept. And what do I mean by that? Say for example we have ftp installed on this server. Now ftp is a protocol for file transfers, and as part of the projects that we'll be working on in this mentorship program, ftp is one of the solutions that you will be implementing. And if that has been installed and configured, the files related to such service can be found in the serve directory. Now some people don't use this anymore. There are other places in which you can keep service folders like the opt. Remember the option folder we talked about? So it becomes an optional thing, whether it's kept in serve or opt. You know, a lot of things have changed over the years. When new Linux distributions and versions of the Linux kernel are being released, things get moved around, and this is one of them. The next on the list is the swap file, and I'm not going to talk about this because this is not actually a subdirectory within the root folder. Don't forget, we're talking about the directory tree structure, and I'm going to be skipping this even though we will be using it in the future. The next one is sys. Now sys is just as it sounds, sys, system. The kernel makes use of the system to keep its own data for operations. And the most important thing you need to know about this sys is the fact that it's mounted on a virtual file system. So if we bring back our df command and I run df-h on the sys directory, you would notice that the file system is sysfs. The size is 0, use is 0, available is 0, everything is 0. And that's basically because it's mounted on a virtual file system. It doesn't make use of any storage, either it's in memory or it's storage on disk. Remember when we did df-h/run, and this is mounted in tempfs, and remember I said tempfs is a temporary file system that is used from the computer's RAM, the installed RAM. Unlike the bin folder, for example, which is actually making use of the storage device. And as you can see, this is a device and this is a partition, and again we'll talk about partitions later on, but this is the physical storage device. As you can see, we have 9.3 gig size and all that. So if you compare sysfs with the rest of them, it's just virtual. It doesn't exist anywhere, even though it does have some data in there. As you can see, the power module kernel, these are all folders that are used by the kernel. You don't want to mess with this, you don't want to change anything, you just want to leave it as it is so you don't mess up your system. Moving on to the temp folder. Now the temp folder is a special kind of folder similar to the tempfs we looked at previously, where temporary files are kept in memory. Now the temp folder is, on the other hand, where temp files and directories are kept on disk. So that's the major difference between the two. Now anyone can write into temp directory, but bear in mind that it is temporary. It is not meant to stay there for long. When there's a system reboot, depending on the configuration on the Linux system, files and folders in the temp directory get deleted. And it's part of the cleanup that Linux does when reboot or startup it's been done. Now, the USR directory. Well, we've talked about these a lot of time, especially when we're talking about binaries, the bin folder and the sbin folder. The USR directory is where programs and libraries are being stored, whether it's used by the system or the system administrator installed programs. It's all kept in the USR directory. And previously, in the very early days, even before Linux, when it was all about Unix operating system, bin was different from sbin, and as things are getting better with a lot of changes to the operating system, there's been a lot of decisions about merging things together, bringing the bin, linking it to the USR bin, and even the sbin, linking it to the USR sbin directory. And with the which ls command we ran previously, you can see that programs and libraries, they now all live in the USR bin folder. And finally, the var directory. The var directory is also part of the subdirectories within the root directory of the Linux operating system, which the system uses to write data during the course of its operation. A typical example is the var log folder. Let's have a look at that. Clearing my screen and doing an ls against var log. There's a whole lot of log related files. You can see the extension .log, install.log, and these are files that are used in real time as the operating system is working. Even when you have custom applications and you configure your application on this Linux server, generally you want to keep the log files consistent, and the best place to do it, you guessed, var log directory. And among the other various subdirectories within the var directory is the var lib. Let's have a look and see what's in there. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. All we can see is just a bunch of folders, but basically it contains a lot of dynamic data and libraries which are usually used by the operating system and programs that runs on the computer. Another very important subdirectory within the var directory is the spool, and this is where data relating to emailing, news, printers get stored on the system. So in conclusion, the var directory basically stores data that gets changed in the course of the operation of the operating system. And this is where I'm going to end the whole directory tree section of the Linux training. I hope this has been very informative for you, and if you really like this content, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so that every time there's a new DevOps related content, you're the first person to get notified. See you in the next video.